The village woke up each morning to the gentle hum of life, a mosaic of sounds that blended with the golden hues of dawn spilling over the rolling hills. As the festival approached, this daily rhythm quickened, becoming a vivid crescendo of anticipation and preparation. Narrow cobblestone streets, lined with small clay houses and thatched roofs, buzzed with activity. Children darted through the crowds, their laughter mingling with the rhythmic pounding of drums and the melodic calls of street vendors. Brightly colored flags and garlands of marigolds fluttered from doorways and across the main square, transforming the humble village into a tapestry of gold, red, and orange. The scent of fresh spices, cumin, turmeric, and cardamom, wafted through the air, mingling with the earthy aroma of clay ovens firing up to bake sweet bread and savory pastries. This festival was more than just an annual event, it was the heartbeat of the village, a sacred time when history and legend danced together. For generations, the villagers had gathered to honor their ancestors, to celebrate the earth's bounty, and to renew the bonds that held their small community tight. Elders told stories beneath the shade of ancient banyan trees, recounting how the festival had once warded off calamity, how the rituals performed here connected the living to the divine. The whole village felt alive with an energy that was almost tangible, like the very air vibrated with meaning and memory. Amidst this vibrant chaos moved a girl whose presence was both part of the village and strangely apart from it. She was young, no older than 16, with eyes that seemed too old for her face, dark, deep pools that held shadows and light in equal measure. She moved silently, a pale figure draped in simple cloth, her bare feet barely making a sound on the dusty ground. While others laughed and sang, she watched, her gaze sharp and penetrating, as if she could see through the faces around her to some hidden truth beneath. Villagers often noticed her lingering near the edges of gatherings, her expression unreadable, a quiet storm held within. There was an unease that followed her like a shadow. Mothers whispered warnings to their children to stay away from the girl whose lips never spoke but whose eyes screamed volumes. Even the village dogs, usually loud and curious, kept a respectful distance from her. Some said she was cursed, others believed she was a seer touched by the gods, blessed and burdened at once. Children who dared to approach found her gaze unsettling, a silent warning that stilled their chatter and sent them scurrying back to the safety of their parents. It was this eerie tension that made her presence as much a part of the festival as the bright decorations and music, a silent thread woven through the celebration's fabric. Beneath the surface of festivity, however, there was a darker current, an undercurrent of fear and resentment that simmered just beneath the village's cheerful facade. The elders, who ruled with an iron will disguised by smiles, had long feared the girl's knowledge. She had seen things that could unravel the carefully constructed order, truths that many wanted buried. Whispers spoke of an incident that had occurred weeks before, something she had witnessed and refused to forget. The village depended on silence, on unspoken agreements to maintain peace. The girl's knowledge threatened to shatter that fragile balance. Her silence was not voluntary. It was a punishment, a cruel and visible mark meant to remind everyone of the price of truth. The day before the festival, in a small, shadowed room behind the temple, her lips had been stitched shut. The act was brutal and deliberate, performed by those who wished to keep her quiet forever. Yet even as the coarse thread sealed her mouth, her eyes remained unbound, fiery beacons that defied the darkness imposed upon her. The villagers spoke in hushed tones, some with pity, others with fear, and a few with thinly veiled satisfaction. They wondered what she might say if she could speak. They debated whether her silence was deserved or if she had become a martyr for some greater cause. But no one dared to undo the stitches, and none could ignore the unspoken messages her eyes conveyed. They were windows to a story that was too dangerous to tell aloud but too powerful to remain hidden. As preparations for the festival marched on, the girl's presence cast a silent question over the village. What truths were too dangerous to voice? What power lay in eyes that could not speak? The festival, meant to unite and celebrate, now held the weight of a secret no one dared confront. In this vibrant village painted with color and sound, amid the joyous dance and rhythmic music, a silent rebellion was brewing, one told not by words, but by the fierce, unyielding language of a girl whose lips were sealed but whose eyes spoke volumes to all who dared to look. The sun had barely begun its descent when the girl was dragged from her small home, her feet barely touching the dusty ground. The shadows lengthened across the village, casting dark shapes over the cobblestones and narrow alleys where children once played without fear. The air grew thick with tension, an unspoken dread that clung to the skin like a shroud. Those who saw her being taken whispered in hurried breaths, fear and helplessness mingling in their voices. Some averted their eyes, unwilling to witness what they suspected was coming. Others watched with frozen silence, paralyzed by the cruelty about to unfold. She was brought to the edge of the village, near the old temple whose stones had witnessed centuries of prayers, hopes, and now horrors. The space was small and shadowed, illuminated only by the flickering light of oil lamps that cast eerie shapes on the cracked walls. The men who forced her here were the village elders, figures usually wrapped in the respect of age and tradition but now revealed as instruments of oppression. Their faces were stern, devoid of mercy, driven by the cold logic of power and control. They did not speak kindly, their voices were low but firm, giving orders with the weight of unquestionable authority. The girl's heart pounded wildly, her breath shallow as they pinned her to a wooden bench. Her wrists were bound with coarse rope, rough against her skin, leaving red marks that burned with every slight movement. Her eyes, wide with terror, searched for any sign of mercy but found none. The silence was broken only by the rustle of fabric and the quiet, deliberate movements of the elder who approached with a thick needle and dark thread. This was no ordinary sewing, it was a cruel ritual meant to imprison her voice, to transform her silence into a spectacle. The first prick of the needle sent a sharp sting through her lips, and tears welled up despite her efforts to remain composed. One by one the stitches were placed, each pass tightening the cruel seal. The pain was intense but nothing compared to the cold realization settling in her chest. Her voice, her words were being taken away, her very existence reduced to mute submission. She wanted to scream, to fight, to plead, but all she could do was blink rapidly, her eyes searching desperately for someone, anyone, to stop this nightmare. Outside the temple walls, the villagers gathered in small groups, their faces pale and eyes wide with a mixture of fear, disbelief, and helplessness. Rumors spread like wildfire, whispers of what was happening to the girl, of the punishment for her defiance. Some claimed they heard her muffled cries, others only the silence that followed. Mothers pulled their children close, while elders shook their heads in sorrow, knowing that the village had crossed a dark line. Yet no one dared to intervene. The fear of the elders' wrath, of becoming the next target, held them captive in their own homes and hearts. The stepbrother, watching from the shadows, felt a twisted sense of triumph. His jealousy and resentment had driven him to this moment, convinced that by silencing her, he could reclaim his place and erase the shame he felt whenever she was near. He did not understand the strength that burned within her eyes, the silent rebellion that no thread could bind. To him, this was victory. To her, it was the beginning of a new battle, a fight fought not with words but with the fierce language of unyielding spirit. As the stitches were tied off, the girl's lips sealed shut, the finality of the act weighed heavily on everyone present. The elders spoke solemnly of order, of tradition, and of the need to preserve peace. But beneath their words lay a brutal truth. Control was maintained through fear and silence. The girl's punishment was a warning to all who dared question the established power, a dark reminder that some voices were meant to be crushed before they could be heard. In the days that followed, the village was gripped by a suffocating quiet. The girl, now a living symbol of muted defiance, moved through the streets with an unsettling grace. Her lips could not speak, but her eyes, wide, fierce, and unbroken, became the village's unspoken language. People who once ignored her began to notice, to interpret the stories told through her gaze. Some saw sorrow, others anger. Many recognized a truth too dangerous to voice aloud but impossible to ignore. The shock of her silencing rippled through the village like a stone dropped in still water, disturbing the surface of everyday life. Markets grew quieter, conversations more guarded. The festival preparations, once filled with joyous anticipation, were now tinged with unease. The village had traded its innocence for a darkness that clung to the edges of every celebration, a constant reminder of the cruelty hidden beneath tradition. Yet even in the face of such brutality, the girl's spirit refused to be broken. The act meant to silence her only amplified her presence, transforming her into a living testament to resilience. Her eyes became a beacon, reflecting not submission but strength, a silent scream that echoed louder than any words could. The villagers, whether out of fear, guilt, or awakening, could no longer look away. The girl's stitched lips were a brutal scar on the village's soul, but her gaze pierced through the darkness, challenging them to confront the truth they had tried to bury. This chilling moment, carved into the village's history, marked a turning point. It was a reminder that power wielded without compassion breeds cruelty, and that the human spirit, even when silenced, finds ways to speak. The girl's ordeal was not just a punishment, it was the spark that would ignite change, a quiet rebellion born from pain and defiance, told through eyes that refused to be closed. From the moment the rough thread sealed her lips, the girl found herself cast into a world that no longer allowed her the simple freedom of speech. Yet, where words were taken, another language began to rise from within her, one far more profound and powerful. Her eyes became her voice, carrying the weight of every unspoken thought, every hidden pain, and every fierce hope that churned beneath her silenced lips. What started as a desperate search for understanding slowly transformed into a mastery of expression that captivated the village and began to shift the currents of power and perception in ways no one could have anticipated. At first, the villagers noticed only the quiet stillness she wore like a cloak. She moved through the streets like a ghost, a pale figure framed by the warm glow of lanterns and fading sunlight. People avoided her gaze, either out of discomfort or fear, unwilling to meet the challenge of those silent, searching eyes. But as days passed, some found themselves caught by the intensity of her stare, something that seemed to pierce through the noise of everyday life and settle deep within their souls. It was as if her eyes spoke a language without words, a language that reached past defenses and touched the raw, unfiltered truths they carried inside. Her eyes conveyed everything that her lips could not. They held stories of betrayal and injustice, of nights spent shivering in loneliness and days brimming with quiet defiance. When she looked at those who had wronged her, her gaze was fierce and unrelenting, a burning question that demanded reckoning. To those who offered kindness or sympathy, her eyes softened, reflecting a fragile trust that had yet to be broken. She learned to send silent pleas for help, to signal danger, and even to express gratitude, all without uttering a single sound. Her expressions became a complex dance of light and shadow, subtle movements that told tales far richer than spoken language. Slowly, the villagers began to see her not as a mute victim but as a living symbol of resistance and resilience. Mothers who once warned their children away now paused to watch her, feeling an inexplicable connection to the silent courage she embodied. The elderly, who had long accepted the village's harsh traditions as unchangeable, found themselves moved by the girl's unspoken truth. Even the children, usually so quick to dismiss those who were different, grew curious, drawn to the magnetic power of her gaze. In markets and fields, whispered conversations started to swirl about the girl with the speaking eyes, and stories of her silent strength spread like wildfire. Her eyes became a mirror reflecting the hidden fractures within the village itself. As she locked gazes with those around her, she revealed the secrets they tried to bury, the guilt of complicity, the fear of standing up, the longing for change. Some villagers saw their own shame reflected in her unwavering stare and averted their eyes, unable to face the silent indictment. Others felt a spark of hope, a sense that perhaps the girl's muteness was not a curse but a calling, a catalyst for awakening. The girl, for her part, learned to wield this silent power with careful intention. She observed closely, reading the subtle shifts in body language and tone, and responded with eyes that could soothe or challenge. When injustice occurred, she would fix the wrongdoers with a gaze so intense it unsettled even the most hardened hearts. Her eyes spoke of courage in the face of fear, of endurance despite pain, and of an unyielding spirit that refused to be diminished. Even the village elders, who had orchestrated her silencing, could not ignore the profound effect her gaze had on the community. Behind their closed doors, they whispered anxiously about the unintended consequences of their cruelty. They had intended to extinguish her voice but instead had unleashed a force that transcended speech. The stitched lips had become a symbol, but the eyes, those vivid, unblinking eyes, became a living message, one that no thread could bind. In quiet moments, when the village was wrapped in the hush of night, the girl would retreat to the edge of the forest, where the stars spilled across the sky like scattered diamonds. There, away from watchful eyes, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her silence and the soaring power of her gaze. She remembered the stories her grandmother had told her about ancestors who communicated through spirit and sight, who wielded silence as a shield and a weapon. These stories fueled her resolve, reminding her that voice was not confined to sound but was found wherever intention and truth lived. Her eyes began to tell stories of ancient strength and sacred resilience, stories that transcended time and place. They spoke of goddesses who had faced oppression and emerged radiant, of warriors who had battled injustice with unyielding spirit, and of those who had found freedom not in speaking but in being seen. The villagers, whether consciously or not, started to recognize these echoes in her gaze. The girl's silence became a canvas on which the community projected their own fears, hopes, and dreams. As the festival drew nearer, the tension in the village grew, but so did the girl's silent influence. Her eyes, once avoided and feared, became a source of inspiration and reflection. People began to question the old ways and the harsh traditions that had demanded her muteness. Some started to whisper that perhaps the true voice of the village was not in its loud celebrations but in the quiet defiance of a girl who dared to speak without speaking at all. Through her eyes, she challenged the village to see beyond the surface, to recognize the pain that silence often masks and the strength that lies within it. Her gaze was a mirror and a beacon, illuminating the path toward change. The girl with stitched lips was no longer a victim but a living testament to the power of unspoken truth, a force that no thread could bind and no silence could drown. The village had long lived under a veil of silence, one woven from fear, tradition, and the unspoken rules imposed by its most powerful figures. Beneath the surface of daily life, secrets festered like wounds left untreated, and justice was often a luxury afforded only to those in favor. The girl, with her keen eyes and restless spirit, had stumbled upon one such secret, a truth so dangerous that it threatened to shatter the delicate balance of control that kept the village's authorities comfortably in place. Before her lips were stitched shut, she had been a witness to an injustice that no one dared speak of aloud. It began as whispers in the marketplace, hushed conversations between wary villagers, and stolen glances toward the secluded homes of those in power. She had seen the shadowed dealings, the unfair punishments, and the silent suffering of those who had no voice. But most terrifying of all was what she had uncovered about the village leader, a man whose respectability masked a cruel and corrupt heart. She knew of his abuses, the way he exploited his position to silence dissent and enrich himself, and how he had harmed those who dared to question him. This knowledge had been her burden and her weapon. She tried to share it, first in words, but soon learned that speaking out only invited danger. When rumors of her defiance reached the ears of the village elders, they moved swiftly to silence her, sewing her lips shut in a brutal act meant to extinguish her voice forever. But they underestimated the power of the truth she carried in her eyes, the truth that no thread could bind or hide. Those villagers who paid close attention began to see the story unfold in her gaze. Her eyes, once filled with fear, now burned with a quiet fire, a steady flame of defiance and revelation. When she looked at the village leader or his followers, her gaze pierced their carefully constructed facades, exposing the rot beneath. Her eyes spoke volumes, of injustice, of courage, and of a demand for accountability that could no longer be ignored. To the observant, her silent witness was a challenge, a call to awaken from the complacency that had kept them imprisoned in fear. The tension between the girl and the powerful figures grew palpably with each passing day. The village leader, feeling the sting of exposure despite the silence he enforced, began to see her not as a mute girl but as a threat, an embodiment of the truths he wished buried. He and his allies whispered behind closed doors, plotting ways to break her spirit or remove her presence altogether. But each attempt to intimidate only deepened the girl's resolve, her eyes shining brighter with the weight of the secrets she guarded. Her silent rebellion began to ripple through the village like an unseen current. Those who had suffered in silence found hope in her courage. Those who had turned away now began to listen with their eyes and hearts. Small acts of resistance sprouted quietly, an unspoken look of solidarity here, a shared story whispered in secret there. The girl's presence became a mirror reflecting the fractures within the village's soul and a beacon calling for justice and change. The village's elders, though outwardly maintaining their stoic facade, were consumed by fear. They knew the power of a voice silenced by force could never truly be crushed when its message was carried in the eyes of the oppressed. Their grip on the village's traditions and authority felt tenuous, threatened by a young girl whose lips were sewn shut but whose spirit roared louder than ever. Even among the villagers, opinions were divided. Some saw the girl as a dangerous agitator, a disruption to the peace maintained by harsh but accepted rules. Others, especially women and the younger generation, began to see her as a symbol of hope and resistance, a living reminder that silence imposed by cruelty could be broken by the strength of truth. Her eyes told stories of injustice that no official decree could erase, stories that began to inspire conversations once thought impossible. As the festival approached, the stakes grew higher. The authorities feared that the girl's silent defiance would embolden others to speak out or act against the corruption they had so carefully hidden. The tension in the village became almost unbearable, with whispers of unrest and rebellion swirling in the air like an approaching storm. The girl, however, remained unbroken, her gaze unwavering even as the forces of power closed in. Her eyes conveyed everything the villagers could no longer say aloud: the pain of betrayal, the hunger for justice, and the unyielding hope for a future where silence was not enforced by fear. Through her, the hidden truths of the village seeped into the collective consciousness, challenging long-held beliefs and stirring a quiet revolution that no one could yet fully grasp. In this way, the girl became more than just a victim of cruelty. She became the keeper of secrets too dangerous for words, the silent voice of a people yearning for change. Her stitched lips were a cruel attempt to mute her, but her eyes, sharp, fierce and full of truth, spoke volumes. They revealed the darkness lurking behind the village's traditions and illuminated the path toward a reckoning that was long overdue. Among the villagers, the girl's silent courage began to weave new connections, forging unexpected alliances even as it deepened old hostilities. Though her lips were cruelly stitched shut, her eyes became a powerful force that drew people to her. Those who saw in her gaze the courage to challenge injustice, and those who feared the upheaval her presence might bring. In this complex web of support and opposition, the village's true divisions were laid bare, revealing the fragile balance between tradition, power, and the yearning for change. One of her earliest and most steadfast allies was an elderly woman known as Mela, the village's herbalist and keeper of old wisdom. Mela had long watched the girl with quiet compassion, sensing beneath her silence a strength that echoed the ancient stories she herself had learned from her grandmother. Unlike many who accepted the harsh customs without question, Mela had always harbored doubts about the authorities and their harsh methods. When the girl's lips were sewn shut, Mela's heart broke, not just for the cruelty inflicted but for the silencing of a vital truth. Mela began to visit the girl in secret, bringing herbs to soothe the pain and, more importantly, listening with her eyes. The two communicated in a language beyond words, sharing stories of endurance, loss, and hope through glances and gestures. Mela's presence became a lifeline, a reminder that the girl was not alone. Through Mela, the girl learned of other villagers who quietly resisted, each in their own way, an underground network of dissent that had long been forced into the shadows. Among the girl's supporters was also Jarin, a young boy whose curiosity and innocence allowed him to see the world differently from most adults. Jarin was drawn to the girl's silent gaze with an unspoken empathy, sensing the weight of her suffering and the power of her unvoiced words. Despite warnings from his family and neighbors to avoid her, he would sneak away from chores just to sit nearby, watching her eyes tell stories no one else dared to hear. Jarin became a messenger in his own right, carrying small tokens and notes between the girl and others, a bridge between silence and speech. Yet, the girl's growing influence was met with fierce resistance from the village's authorities and their allies. The village leader, the very man whose secrets she had uncovered, saw her as a threat that needed to be extinguished. His followers, men hardened by years of maintaining the old order, began to spread rumors designed to isolate her further, whispers that painted her as cursed, dangerous, or possessed. They warned the villagers that supporting her meant inviting chaos and divine wrath upon the community. Among these opponents was Malric, a burly enforcer loyal to the village leader, whose task was to intimidate and suppress any form of dissent. Malric viewed the girl's silent defiance with growing contempt, frustrated that her eyes could speak louder than any threats or punishments. He led patrols that watched her movements, sought to cut off her contacts, and tried to instill fear in those who dared show her kindness. But each act of cruelty only seemed to harden the girl's resolve, making her gaze more resolute and her silent message more compelling. The tension between allies and enemies played out not only in grand confrontations but also in the small moments. Furtive glances exchanged in the marketplace, whispered conversations behind closed doors, and the hesitant yet growing willingness of some villagers to question the established order. The girl's eyes became a mirror reflecting each person's true nature. To her friends, they showed hope, resilience, and a shared commitment to justice. To her foes, they revealed defiance and the unstoppable force of truth. In these relationships, the power of her eyes was transformative. Villagers who had once accepted silence as a fact of life began to see the possibility of change. Some who had been fearful found courage, emboldened by the girl's silent strength. Even those who remained loyal to the old ways could not ignore the growing cracks in their authority, cracks widened by the simple but profound language of a pair of unyielding eyes. Jarin, inspired by the girl's courage, began to gather other children who listened intently to the stories her eyes told. Together, they formed a quiet community of witnesses, learning to communicate through gestures and expressions, discovering the power of silence as a form of resistance. This new generation, shaped by the girl's silent example, represented a hopeful future, one that might one day break free from the cycles of fear and repression. Meanwhile, Mela worked behind the scenes to protect the girl, using her knowledge of herbs and ancient rituals to heal wounds both visible and invisible. She also counseled villagers torn between loyalty and conscience, reminding them of the values that once held the community together. compassion, justice, and respect for all voices, spoken or not. Through Mela's wisdom, the girl's silence was not seen as defeat but as a sacred vow, a challenge to the village to listen with more than ears. However, the girl's silent rebellion was fragile, constantly threatened by the violence and suspicion sown by her enemies. Mauric's men grew bolder, and the village leader's paranoia deepened, leading to harsher measures and crueler attempts to break the girl's spirit. Yet each attempt only made her eyes burn brighter, her silent message growing clearer and harder to ignore. The growing divide within the village culminated in moments of confrontation, glances exchanged like unspoken warnings, gatherings where whispers turned to murmurs of revolt, and scenes where the girl's eyes met those of her oppressors with unwavering courage. The village became a battleground of sight and silence, where power was measured not by words but by the strength of unspoken truth. In this charged atmosphere, the girl's relationships with allies and enemies shaped the unfolding story of resistance. Her eyes had become both a shield and a sword, a beacon for those seeking justice and a thorn in the side of those clinging to power. The village found itself at a crossroads, caught between the oppressive silence of tradition and the powerful language of a girl who refused to be silenced. As the festival approached, a time traditionally reserved for celebration, the tension between hope and fear reached its peak. The girl's silent gaze held the village's attention, challenging each person to choose their side, to listen not with their ears but with their hearts. In this moment, the eyes that had once been stitched shut became the eyes that saw the future, eyes that dared to rewrite the story of their people. The village stirred to life as preparations for the festival unfolded, a mixture of excitement and unease hanging thick in the air. Colorful banners were hung between wooden poles, fragrant herbs and flowers arranged meticulously in every corner, and the sound of drums and flutes echoed through narrow alleys. The festival was more than a celebration, it was a sacred tradition, a time when the village came together to honor their ancestors and renew their bonds. Yet this year, the usual joy was shadowed by a quiet tension, an undercurrent of fear that rippled through the crowd like a restless wind. The girl's presence, though silent, grew more powerful with each passing day. Her stitched lips, meant to silence her, had instead transformed her into a living symbol of resistance. She moved through the village with a calm defiance, her eyes speaking volumes to those who dared to look beyond appearances. Her gaze met the curious, the fearful, and the hopeful alike, communicating without a single word the strength that lay beneath her quiet exterior. Many villagers were caught between reverence for tradition and the stirring doubt that the festival's surface joy could no longer mask the fractures beneath. Families debated in hushed tones, some clinging to the rituals that had defined their lives for generations, others whispering about the injustices the girl's eyes had unveiled. Mothers pulled their children closer, elders exchanged wary glances, and groups of young people huddled in corners, their voices low but filled with urgent energy. Signs of unrest began to manifest in subtle ways. The usual harmony of preparations was punctuated by sudden silences or sharp exchanges. Some villagers openly questioned the village leader's authority, emboldened by the girl's silent example. Others, fearful of reprisal, urged caution and compliance, warning that disruption could bring ruin not only to the festival but to the entire community. The girl's allies worked quietly to channel this unrest into hope. Mela, the wise herbalist, moved among the villagers offering counsel and reassurance, reminding them that the festival was also a time for renewal, a chance to cleanse old wounds and embrace new beginnings. Jorin and the children who had gathered around the girl spread messages of courage and solidarity through gestures and shared looks, fostering a sense of unity that transcended spoken language. Meanwhile, the village authorities grew increasingly anxious. The leader, sensing his control slipping, tightened his grip on the preparations. He dispatched his enforcers to monitor gatherings, ordered stricter enforcement of rules, and spread rumors aimed at undermining the girl's influence. His attempts to intimidate were met with growing resistance, however, as more villagers found their voices, or their eyes, inspired by the girl's silent courage. As the festival drew nearer, the tension in the village became almost tangible. The vibrant colors and festive sounds masked an undercurrent of uncertainty and anticipation. The girl, despite her imposed silence, stood at the center of this storm, her eyes reflecting the hopes and fears of a community on the brink of transformation. In the final days before the festival, small acts of defiance multiplied. A banner hung slightly askew bore a subtle symbol of resistance. Villagers exchanged meaningful glances during rituals. Even the children, emboldened by the girl's example, played games that mimicked the struggle between silence and speech, power and freedom. The stage was set for a festival unlike any the village had ever known, a celebration that would test the strength of traditions, the resilience of a people, and the unspoken power of a girl whose eyes told the story of a silent revolution. The village held its breath, waiting to see if fear or hope would prevail. The festival night arrived cloaked in both celebration and tension. Lanterns swayed gently in the evening breeze, casting flickering shadows across the eager faces gathered in the village square. The air was thick with the mingled scents of incense, roasted herbs, and sweat, the unmistakable perfume of a community holding its breath between tradition and change. The usual songs and dances played on, but beneath the surface, an electric charge hummed, the quiet promise that something monumental was about to unfold. In the heart of the square stood the girl, her lips tightly sewn, her body still but her eyes alive with fierce purpose. Throughout the evening, her gaze had been steadily gathering power, weaving silent stories that threaded through the crowd. And now, as the drums reached a crescendo and the villagers' eyes were fixed on the ceremonial fire, she seized the moment. Her eyes scanned the sea of faces, friends, foes, and those caught somewhere in between, revealing the truths they had long tried to hide. Her gaze first locked onto the village leader, the man whose cruelty had sparked her punishment. The crowd stiffened as their leader met her eyes, unable to look away. In that silent exchange, the weight of his misdeeds pressed heavily into the open air, accusations unspoken but understood. The girl's eyes, fierce and unyielding, shattered the carefully constructed illusions of authority and respectability he had built. Whispers rippled through the crowd as people began to see not the revered leader, but the flawed, fearful man beneath. Her eyes then turned to the other villagers, especially those who had been complicit in the silence, those who had ignored injustice out of fear or apathy. The girl's gaze held them accountable without uttering a word, igniting a collective unease. It was as if the weight of her silent testimony was pulling back a veil, exposing the village's deepest wounds. Some averted their eyes, shame flooding their faces. Others met her stare with defiance, unwilling to admit their guilt. But amidst the shock, something extraordinary began to stir. The girl's eyes, once a symbol of forced silence, now became a beacon of awakening. The crowd's tension shifted as murmurs of recognition grew louder. Villagers began to connect the dots between her silent suffering and the injustices they had long witnessed but never confronted. The festival, once merely a ritual, transformed into a crucible of truth and reckoning. A small group of villagers, her allies, stepped forward, their faces alight with newfound courage. Mela, the wise herbalist, stood beside the girl, her own eyes reflecting pride and solidarity. Jorin and the children, emboldened by the girl's strength, gathered close, their silent support echoing through the crowd. This display of unity challenged the old order, signaling that the days of unquestioned authority might be ending. The village leader's followers reacted swiftly, attempting to silence the murmurs and restore control. But their efforts were futile against the wave of awakening the girl's gaze had unleashed. The crowd's collective energy surged, the boundaries between silence and speech blurring as people began to voice their fears, grievances, and hopes. Confrontations erupted, words sharp and raw, accusations laid bare. Yet amidst the chaos, the girl's eyes remained steady, a calm center in the storm. Her silent message had broken through the layers of denial and fear, inspiring a reckoning that no amount of force could suppress. As the festival night deepened, the village found itself transformed. The girl who had been stitched silent became the living embodiment of truth and resilience. Her eyes, once a symbol of pain and oppression, now reflected the spark of change, lighting a path toward justice and healing for the entire community. After the festival night, the village awoke to a new reality, one that no longer tolerated silence and fear. The girl's silent courage had pierced through years of repression, leaving an indelible mark on the hearts of the villagers. Slowly but surely, change began to ripple through the community like fresh water breaking through a cracked dam. The village leader, once unchallenged, found his authority severely weakened. Whispers of his cruelty and deceit spread beyond the festival, and many who had once followed him began to question their loyalty. Some of his closest allies distanced themselves, fearing association with a man whose power was now tarnished. Those who had helped silence the girl faced a reckoning. Some were confronted openly by villagers demanding accountability, while others retreated into silence, their influence diminished. Amidst this upheaval, the girl's role transformed. No longer just a victim, she became a powerful symbol of resistance and courage. Villagers, especially women and children, looked to her as a beacon of hope, someone who embodied the strength to speak truth without words. Her stitched lips became a poignant reminder of injustice, while her unwavering eyes inspired many to find their own voices. Community gatherings shifted in tone. Where once silence had ruled, open discussions about fairness, tradition, and change took root. The village began to question old customs and consider new ways of living that honored dignity and respect for all. The girl, though still unable to speak aloud, was at the heart of this transformation, her silent defiance echoing louder than any words. Her journey from a silenced outcast to a revered figure showed the village that courage could transcend oppression, and that true power lay in the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. The village, forever changed, began to heal, guided by the eyes of a girl who had dared to reveal what others wished to hide. In a world that often values spoken words above all else, her silence became a powerful form of communication that transcended language itself. Though her lips were sewn shut, her eyes spoke volumes, carrying emotions, truths, and resistance in a way that words sometimes fail to capture. This silent voice echoed through the village, proving that communication is not limited to sound but is deeply rooted in presence, expression, and connection. Her eyes became a language of their own, a beacon that illuminated hidden stories and unveiled the realities many wanted to ignore. In her gaze, people found a mirror reflecting their own fears, hopes, and doubts. They witnessed the courage it took to bear injustice without surrendering, and the strength found in resilience and quiet defiance. Her silent communication reminded everyone that sometimes the most profound truths need no words, only willing hearts to see and understand. The act of silencing her was meant to erase her, to strip her of identity and power. Yet, paradoxically, it was this enforced silence that amplified her presence and message. In refusing to be invisible, she showed that silence can be a form of resistance, an unbreakable shield and a subtle weapon that challenges oppression without uttering a single sound. Her story offers a message of hope to all who find themselves muted, whether by circumstance, fear, or force. It speaks to the inner strength that lies dormant in those silenced, encouraging them to find alternative ways to express their truth and connect with others. It reminds us that even when voices are stilled, the human spirit finds ways to speak, to resist, and to inspire change. Ultimately, her journey reveals that vision, the ability to see and be seen, is as vital as voice. When words fail or are denied, the eyes become windows to the soul, carrying stories that demand acknowledgement and respect. Her gaze did not just tell her story, it invited the entire village to witness their shared humanity and to embrace transformation. In the silence of her stitched lips, the girl's eyes shone with the light of courage, resilience, and hope, proving that sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones that speak without words. The journey of the girl whose lips were stitched shut before the festival is not just a tale of cruelty and oppression, but a profound testament to the indomitable spirit of human resilience and the transformative power of silence. In a world that often equates voice with power, her story forces us to reconsider what it means to communicate, to resist, and to heal. It invites us into the intimate, often overlooked language of the eyes, the subtle expressions, and the quiet defiance that can break through the strongest walls of injustice. At the beginning, the village was a place steeped in tradition, a microcosm of a society that valued order, hierarchy, and silence as a means of control. The festival, a ritual meant to renew bonds and celebrate collective identity, was overshadowed by a dark undercurrent. The act of stitching her lips shut was not merely physical punishment but a symbolic attempt to erase her existence, to deny her agency, and to instill fear in others who might dare to question the status quo. It was a cruel message, that some truths must remain hidden, that some voices must be silenced for the sake of peace and tradition. Yet, as her story unfolds, what becomes evident is the profound failure of such oppression. The silence imposed upon her did not extinguish her power, rather, it ignited a new kind of voice, one that transcended words and demanded to be heard. Through her eyes, the girl communicated a truth that words alone could not convey. Her gaze became a powerful force, breaking through denial and fear, uniting the villagers in a shared awakening. Her eyes told stories of pain, injustice, courage, and hope. They revealed what was hidden beneath the surface, secrets that those in power sought to bury and wounds that the community had long ignored. Her transformation from a silenced victim to a symbol of resistance challenges us to rethink the nature of communication itself. The eyes, often called the windows to the soul, became the vessel of her unspoken narrative. In every glance, every expression, she wove a silent language that was more powerful than any spoken word. This shows us that communication is not confined to the audible. It is also the language of presence, of being seen and witnessing, of sharing emotions beyond speech. Moreover, the girl's silent defiance speaks to a universal truth about human dignity, that even in the harshest conditions the spirit yearns for expression and connection. When words are stolen, the body and soul find alternative ways to tell their stories. This defiance, the refusal to become invisible or broken, embodies the essence of resistance. It is a reminder that power can be challenged not only through confrontation or speech but through quiet courage and unyielding presence. The village's eventual awakening, sparked by the girl's eyes, reflects the potential for change within societies burdened by injustice. It illustrates how collective consciousness can shift when individuals refuse to accept oppression in silence. The villager's journey, from denial to recognition, from fear to courage, mirrors the stages of healing in any community facing deep wounds. It reminds us that transformation often begins with seeing and acknowledging uncomfortable truths. Her allies, from the wise herbalist to the children who surrounded her, symbolize the ripple effect of courage. Their support illustrates the importance of solidarity and the power of shared vision in fostering change. Together, they create a space where the girl's silent message could flourish, turning personal suffering into communal strength. This dynamic highlights how social change requires both individual bravery and collective action. The fate of those who tried to silence her, the village leader and his followers, serves as a cautionary tale about the limits of authoritarian control. Their eventual loss of influence underscores the idea that power built on fear and suppression is fragile and ultimately unsustainable. It is the truth, embodied by those brave enough to reveal it, that holds lasting power. The festival itself, initially a backdrop for the girl's punishment, becomes a crucible for transformation. It shifts from a rigid tradition enforcing silence to a living, breathing moment of reckoning and renewal. This shift challenges the rigidity of cultural rituals when they are used to uphold injustice and opens a space for traditions to evolve, reflecting deeper values of justice, empathy, and inclusion. On a broader level, the girl's story resonates as a metaphor for all who have been silenced, whether by oppression, trauma, or circumstance. It speaks to anyone who has experienced the pain of being unheard or invisible and offers a profound message of hope, that silence is not the end. There is power in waiting, in watching, and in finding new ways to speak truth. Her eyes, reflecting courage and resilience, encourage those who feel voiceless to keep striving for expression and justice in whatever form they can. Her journey also invites us to consider the relationship between suffering and transformation. Her pain and enforced silence were not erased or forgotten but were transformed into a source of strength and inspiration. This transformation is a reminder that healing often involves reclaiming one's story and using personal pain to fuel collective change. The story challenges societal norms about female power and the ways in which women's voices have historically been suppressed. By refusing to let her silence define her, the girl reclaims her agency and in doing so, shifts the narrative around gender and power within her community. She becomes not just a victim but a living symbol of female resilience, inspiring others to resist shame and oppression. The imagery of her stitched lips and speaking eyes is a powerful poetic symbol. It evokes the paradox of enforced silence coupled with undeniable presence. This duality reflects the complexity of resistance, the struggle between imposed invisibility and the human need to be seen and heard. Her eyes shine as beacons of truth in a world that tried to blind them, reminding us that the human spirit can never be fully subdued. In the end, the girl's story is a timeless narrative about the transformative potential of courage, the multifaceted nature of communication, and the enduring hope for justice. It teaches us that silence does not equal absence, that even when voices are stolen, the truth finds ways to emerge, often more powerful than before. Her eyes, telling stories no words could capture, continue to inspire the village and anyone who hears her tale. They reflect a universal human experience, the fight for dignity, the quest for justice, and the power of resilience. Through her silent gaze, she becomes not only a witness to injustice but a catalyst for profound change. This tale leaves us with a profound message, that no matter the chains imposed upon us, the spirit's longing for freedom and truth will always find a way to shine through. The girl who was silenced before the festival did not just survive, she transformed an entire community by teaching them to see, to listen beyond words, and to embrace the strength within silence. Her story is a call to all of us to recognize the power in silence, to honor the courage of those who resist invisibility, and to remember that sometimes the loudest voices are those that speak not with sound, but with unwavering presence and unbreakable will.